Good evening. It is Monday, January 9th, 5:15 this Monday evening, and the Carroll City Council is now in session. Would you all please join me and rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have tonight's agenda in front of us. We have the consent agenda included in our packet, which includes the minutes of the December 19th meeting, approval of this cycle's bills and claims. We have one retail liquor license to approve tonight, which is for the Carrollton Inn, and pretty short consent agenda, but if there are any questions or comments on the agenda, I would seek a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Tom and JJ, approving tonight's consent agenda. Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Dirks?
Yes.
Seaman?
Yes.
Streck? Yes. Pace?
Yes.
Bauer?
Yes.
Cornero?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Perfect, thank you. We have item number 4, which are oral requests and communications from the audience, and I see none. There's no one online. Moving forward, there are no ordinances or resolutions to approve tonight. Moving forward, we will go to items under 7 under reports, and we'll start with Chad and the Carroll Rec Center Improvement Project Change Order number 3. Chad?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Council. So this is a continuation off of our discussion at our last city council meeting. There's really no further updates. I did send out the new PDFs to show a better breakdown. Hopefully those look a lot better and a little easier to now learn and say now.
None are mine.
Okay. Is there a certain way that
Well, I
you
have to,
recommend?
well, one of them comes at 33%, so I increase it to 100 to read it, and then the next one, it's so huge I can't read it on my screen. Mine didn't change. Throw this thing away.
I'll keep working on that, try and tidy it up a little bit, I guess.
Chad, would you want to talk a little bit about you had a telephone conversation, I think you and the mayor had a phone conference with the contractor and our engineer?
Correct, yeah. So was it 2 Fridays ago, me, Mark, and RDG and Bading had a phone conference together, just going over a lot of these things, a little bit line by line, really discussing the different things for what goes into a change order, why they're doing change orders. I thought the meeting went pretty well. It did let them kind of explain some of their actions and why we're doing some of the things they have to do. Mark, if you would like to touch on it a little bit more, I know you probably have.
Well, I was pleased with going into more detail, line by item of the 7 items that were involved in change order number 3, to the point where, frankly, I understood it better than I can explain it. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a contractor, I'm just a dumb old car guy, but it was reasonable the way they explained why these changes happened. Most of them were due to surprises, discovered once that the project actually began. I'm not an engineer, and I don't want to necessarily point fingers at the engineer, but I think that faced with a project of this scope again, I would know better what to go into, whether or not it's with RDG specifically or another architect or engineer. What's hiding behind door number 3 is, I wish I could explain it better than that simple approach, but I spoke to all of you individually because I was in a bit of a predicament, because I found out the next morning of that Monday meeting that this was going to delay the project significantly and perhaps cause further costs to the project, because we'd be, pulling back from the project. And, you know, I sensed from most of you that's like, well, you don't like it any better than I do, but we got to press forward. And, you know, I'm not going to say that got us over a barrel or, you know, some of these things, but, you know, we, as policymakers, do the best that we can in the roles that we play. And again, you know, looking down at each one of you and knowing what your skill sets are, you know, we're all honest with one another. You know, being an engineer or a contractor is really certainly not one of them. And so, you know, Chad and I sat there and listened rather intently to it. It was probably an hour-long visit, and it went well. You know, I certainly didn't want to offend anybody. That, you know, we've got a very valued contractor, local contractor, and a huge contributor to the city of Carroll, and I wanted to make sure that relationship remained intact, and I think we accomplished that. But again, at the same time, I failed in finding a way to get any concessions for us or any reconsiderations whatsoever. And then faced with this decision to, you know, sign this directive, I felt compelled to go ahead and move forward with that as to not delay the process and incur any additional costs beyond that. So if anybody has any regret for that, I'm the guy to point the finger at. But, you know, I'm pleased with their explanation. I'm displeased with gaining any concessions or any further considerations whatsoever, because I do feel still that the architect is kind of responsible for some of these as well, but that fell on pretty deaf ears. So, Chad, did I sum that up?
Nailed it.
Well, I nailed it, except for getting any concessions. But does anybody have any direct questions? And again, it's been 2 weeks, and I'll try and recall everything. I kept pretty copious notes of the conversation, but I'd be glad to fill in.
I don't have any questions in regards to that, but I do think about going forward, you know, with you being on site and the contracts, or when they're on site and when things like that come up, like, you know, are they gonna come and get you and talk through it maybe a little bit more, make sure that we understand before they
Correct.
just jump
Yes.
to,
So every month, we actually have a construction meeting where we go over a lot of these. It's a good time for us to ask questions. You know, I have other staff members there as well, just so we can fully gain the scope of what is happening in each one of these. And, you know, if you remember in one of these, it was a keying thing. You know, that helped us more because it was not supposed to be keyed one way.
Right.
With a certain door handle. That came from one of those meetings, so we could move forward with it the correct way. So, you know, we didn't pay for something, and then in a year, we have to take it out and pay for it again. So that's what some of this stuff is generally. Now, of course, there's gonna be times that's not the case, like some of the other items in this, but yes, next time, like I said in the email, we're gonna try and get as much of this out. Any change orders in the future, we'll get them out to you a minimum 2 weeks in advance to allow you to have time, to allow you to come and ask questions. Be happy to meet with you down there to take you through and kind of help explain to the best of my knowledge. And if we have to get Brad or, you know, somebody there from his team down there to help explain it further, we can.
I was there, I'm trying to think here, a week or two ago, and I wasn't able to get in. I know that there wasn't much staff there, but is there, can you even just give us an update on where things are at?
Sure. Most of the interior walls in the new women's locker room and family changing rooms are up. The concrete, I believe, is all done, or if not, maybe one corner left.
One spot by the showers.
Yeah. Yep. And that's relating to the pit drains in here too. So hopefully they'll finish that up by next week. You're seeing a lot of piping. HVAC is already starting to be vented in. Lighting is already starting to be installed. So it's moving. Technically, I think we're right on, if not a little bit ahead of schedule.
They called it about 40% complete, right? And that, I think I remember
Maybe.
that they used that.
I
So
would guess a little lower, but
because I was asking about more change orders. You know, we've already had 3 change orders, and we're only 40% done, and, you know, what lies ahead yet. And, you know, they were rather clear that, you know, there's a potential for more. But we know there's one for sure that's going to be lingering here pretty quick.
We know of
but-
about probably 3 or 4, maybe not full change orders, but items on change orders that will be coming up before too long, just things that will need addressed that are, whether they're in design phase or in RDG's hands right now.
I left off something that I thought was at least valuable for me, that, you know, once it hit the media and so on, I had local subcontractors come to me and say, hey, you know, put up a good fight, you know, you're doing good, you know, stuff like that, and ask questions and things. But each of them said that when you have a project of that scope and magnitude and in a 45-year-old building, you better expect these types of things to happen. And so they were, you know, I kind of expected them at first, you know, saying, you know, go get them, Tiger, but at the same time they were saying, you know, back down, because it's, you know, they're reasonable if, you know, they can substantiate their claims and validate why. And, you know, I came out of there understanding it better than I can explain.
Well, and not that anybody wants to use your contingency 100%, but that's what it's there for. I mean, that's why we have it, unfortunately. But you're right, when you do something to a building that's that old, there's so much you can't know, I think.
Interior or reconstruction with anything like this, that's where you're gonna get a large majority of change orders. It's not new construction, it's not new areas. That's where your highest volume is gonna be. Once you start tearing into an area, there's just a lot of unknown.
This old house.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Chad or myself, Carolyn?
No, I just wanted to say, I commend all of you for working on it as a team and figuring out a plan to move forward to get things, it sounds like you're noticed early, get things, you know, questions answered, hammer out any problems, so we aren't going back and forth, you know, wasting people's time during a council meeting. We need to be transparent, but I think you have a good plan in place, and
Thank you.
that sounds good, so, thanks.
Anyone else? Do we have to take any formal action on this?
Yes.
Okay, so do we have, so what's, the motion is to approve the change order directive?
Change order number 3.
Or just the,
Change
okay,
Change order number 3.
okay, so is there a motion to that effect?
Second?
Tom, and then seconded by Carolyn, to approve the change order number 3.
Don't you have to put in the amount?
Yeah, 28,000, I had it pulled up here.
648.
648, thank you. Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Base.
Yes.
Dirks.
Yes.
Bauer.
Yes.
Schreck. Yes. Bornero.
Yes.
Seaman.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you. And then we move, Chad, you're still on deck because you're the next item under 7B, a report of bid opening for the ash tree removal project number 4.
Yep, thank you, Mayor. On December 20th, 9 bids were received for the ash tree removal, phase 4 received. Attached is a bid opening report. Our lowest bid was from Snyder's Tree Service. However, I am recommending tonight to the council that we take Trinary Tree Service out of Altoona, Iowa for the amount of $54,000 to complete our aspect or our part of the ash tree project. I know Mr. Snyder's here tonight. I'm sure he would like to say a few words or.
Well, it's obvious I was low bid, I expected to get it, that's what we give bids for, to have somebody from out of the area come in and do the job. I know the concern is the timeline. On our last, I've had 3 of the lettings go in our favor. I was the lowest bidder, and one was the time schedule it took us to get it done. We had some delays, but COVID had happened just after we got the contract, and I lost 2 employees. In a small business, that's a lot. We had some problems with some equipment, and we had to stop because of what we thought was a DNR mandate for cutting on, for bats, which was just, it was a mistake, but it cost like 3 months of time. And then that is, I imagine, is your concern, is my time. And I can tell you that as a low bidder, a local contractor, it's got 100% of my attention to get it done. I think I could have the cemetery, or there's not a cemetery involved, which is helpful. It's the golf course, which is the primary one to be done before they start swinging at balls. And I don't think there's any problem with that. The parks would be after that, and I don't think there's a sense of urgency on it, but I don't see why we wouldn't be done before April.
And you don't feel like you have any problem knocking out 101 trees in just a matter of months?
No. And
With the contract, you also understand that there's only 2 total payments for this entire project? Okay. Well, again, this is just simply my recommendation. It's obviously the decision of the council to move forward. Just looking for your recommendation.
Very good. Thank you, Chad. Thank you for your input too, as well. I think historically, the council has always tried to, give preference to local contractors and vendors. And I'm certainly that's going to weigh, rather heavily on their decision that they're about to make here too. It was my understanding, the way that Chad had explained it to me, and what happened the last time, turned into be, again, maybe there was some, variables that were outside of your control. But the bottom line is it just took extraordinarily long, to get complete. And Chad's recommendation is just based on a crew that's going to come in and knock it out responsibly, cleanly, and timely, and that it's only a fraction higher than, the lowest bid. So I would open it up for the council to give me your thoughts and seek an approval for this somewhere. Anybody care to?
Well, I want to say keep it local. I mean, I said that in the email to you earlier. I mean, if you think you can get it done by April, I don't see a problem with that. I read in here that there was 3 phases to the last project. Phase 1 completed summer, fall of 2021. Phase 2 completed January of 2022. And phase 3 in December of 2022. So there's 3 phases to that last project.
No, there were 3 separate projects.
Okay.
This is project number 4.
Okay. And is there a timeline on this right now, currently? Okay.
And the bid actually didn't stipulate a timeline?
Correct. In ash bid number 3, we were told that we shouldn't have a timeline to be finished due to weather, unknown concerns such as COVID happening again, anything like that. We keep a timeline out of.
But there still needs to be a reasonable expectation out there, and maybe not a definitive timeline, but a reasonable expectation to get it done within certainly less than, what happened on the last time, correct?
Correct.
Well, and I think there's a consideration too of people in the area and how long, I heard some complaints from the cemetery area.
that would have been the contractor after I did the first 2. The next contractor, that's where complaints come.
No, they saw it was when you were there with your trucks, and I'm just the messenger, but I think timing is really important if you're, when you're considering the noise, the trucks, et cetera, et cetera. And for me, I like that 101 trees by Trenery done in 5 to 7 days versus with 7 to 8 people and versus 3 months. That's really important to me. Just get it done. Get in there, get it done. Be efficient. And,
So you're willing to let $54,000 worth of taxpayer money walk right out of Carroll? For a timeline that's not on a contract? This is an open bid. I'm just asking out loud.
Right, and we are allowed under the Code of Iowa not to take the lowest bid if there are other extenuating circumstances. So I'm looking at the efficiency, and I'm all for local, but we hire a lot of people that aren't local. And I think for something this large, I think it's important to be timely, but I certainly, if Mr. Snyder wants to bid on smaller projects because he has a smaller crew, I'm good with that.
I'm with Tom. I'd rather keep it local. Quite frankly, I don't think that other company's gonna come in and get that many trees done in 7 to 8 days.
Their first job, they had an ash tree number 2. They had 40 trees and they were gone in 3.
They're very quick. Tenary was right on them.
So this is my concern is if we have 1 or 2 trees, are these guys gonna do this or are we gonna have a local contractor do it? Because if I'm a local contractor, I know what I'm gonna tell you if something like this happens, so.
I think the size of the project is what is speaking volumes. That would be all that I would comment is, I don't know if he's fully staffed at this point or not, but I can imagine how difficult it would be to take down that many trees with a smaller crew. I agree that we generally would want to keep it local. I don't see that this is about taking money out of local, even though it looks that way. I think it's a big project. I mean, I would think for all intents and purposes, if we had, 1, 2, 10, 20 trees, they can handle it.
101 trees is not that, we've done projects since the elm disease, we've done projects like this many times. We just happen to have, when COVID hit and I lost 2 employees, that was a delay. There was a 3-month delay because of a bat migration or a bat, I don't know what it was, a DNR mandate. That was 3 months of that delay. And the other part, I can handle 101 trees without a question. 2 trees or 3 trees a day is what we'll do. And when we're, so if you look at that, it's only 90 working days. I should have it done. But that is, you're really 3 months. January, February, and March, and I'll be done.
Can you start working on it right now?
Yep.
And did you say 90 working days or 90 days?
90 days. It'll be, I looked at an average of 2.5 to 3 trees a day, and I know that in the golf course, we'll probably double that. They're close, there's no traffic, you drop the trees and clean them up. The difference is in the cemetery, you don't just drop the tree, you piece it down, it's a time consumer. This is a whole different scenario.
Where are all these trees at?
Scattered. There's 51 at the golf course. The rest are located in just various parks,
Various city parks.
various city parks.
Is that what the red X's are?
Correct.
Okay.
And there's a total of how many?
101.
And they're all mapped?
Yep.
101 trees divided by, did you say 90 days, 90 working days?
No, I don't need that
Tree a
90
day,
working
right.
days. 90 days total.
More-
I
more
think
than a tree a
3
day.
trees a day, you're talking 35 working days. But weather happens, there's certain things that are gonna, extend that a little bit, but the working days, 35 days, and I should have it done.
And did you say we don't have a deadline on this, or when do we want this done?
You're advised not to put deadlines on these.
By,
Just a reasonable amount of time. I mean, ideally, we'd want all of them down and done off the golf course before golf season even starts.
which is exactly-ish?
Mid-April.
Okay. I just think that needs to be not an elephant in the room. I mean, April 1.
And I understand that as a priority. If I was to get the contract, that would be my priority too, is to get the golf course done first. The rest are in parks, and they don't carry the same priority, although they would be the next thing I'm doing. I'm not doing private work while I do this.
So can you take a truck out in the golf course right now?
I was just gonna ask that.
It's frozen.
Oh.
It doesn't matter whether it's Snyder or somebody else. That's a question for everybody, you know?
But that just shortens the amount of time that you're gonna have to work on it if you can't take a vehicle out. You gotta wait till it is frozen. I mean, it's all.
So wouldn't that stop the timeline from the other company? They run into the same thing?
Absolutely, but if they have more people, they move faster. But I'm just, in my head, I'm thinking.
So if you can't get out in the golf course, can you get at these parks? Without tearing up the lawns and
Well, it just depends on how you're using your equipment, but
you won't tear them up like you would the golf course.
depends.
It does
I mean, you're talking regular park grass that, maybe in no-mow areas or higher grassed areas versus something right on the edge of a fairway that's normally cut below 2 inches all year round.
Snow would get in the way as well, right? Especially if it's
Yep.
axle deep.
So, I mean, if we get a big snowstorm, it's obviously gonna delay anyway.
Right. Any other thoughts or comments? Hearing none. Is there a motion to accept the low bid or a motion to accept Chad's recommendation of the second low bid?
I'll make a motion for the low bid. Motion to approve low bid by Snyder Tree Service.
In the amount of
Keep it local.
54,000, I believe it was.
No, it's not
Oh,
quite.
sorry.
No, that's,
No, 52,974. No, the second low was 54.
52,974.
Yeah, 52,974, sorry. Is that your motion, Tom?
My motion.
Is there a second to that effect?
I'll second.
We have a kind of a tie there.
Rock, paper, scissors?
Kyle, second it? Okay, we have a motion and a second to accept the low bid of Snyder Tree Service, 52,974. Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Seaman,
no.
Dirks,
Yes.
Bornero,
Yes.
Shrek. Yes. Base,
Yes.
Bauer.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you all.
And I thank you. You got, good job.
Just like Larry the Cable Guy says, get her done. All right. Okay. Randy, I think you're on deck for the next one. Item number 7C and the wastewater treatment plant effluent copper compliance. I didn't pronounce that right, did I?
Sure.
Affluent.
Effluent. You are
Okay.
correct.
All right.
Thank you. In March 2019, the wastewater treatment plant effluent and receiving stream sampling and testing was initiated to generate data to perform or to complete a copper biotic ligand model, or BLM. That BLM calculates site-specific copper limits for the discharge from the wastewater treatment plant. There were limits that were given to the city. They're based on default values. The BLM actually kind of defines our receiving stream and then calculates the actual limits that the stream can assimilate, in this case in copper. That testing has now been completed, and the DNR has run the BLM and provided their preliminary values that I've included in your memorandum. And just briefly, the limits that we're facing in 2023, 30-day average concentration of 0.01687. Now with the BLM and our current discharge location, it's 0.04. So they have increased significantly across the board. But the highest discharge of copper for 30-day average in the last 6 years has been 0.055. So those BLM results don't completely clear the plant to conform with that effluent limit. It'll still violate at times that effluent limit. At this point, there's a couple of options. The first would be to accept those BLM limits that the DNR has provided, and they would prepare a permit amendment to incorporate those into the operating permit for the plant. That amendment would include a compliance schedule to comply with those limits. Now, compliance has been characterized as being quite costly, both in capital and operation. Compliance, the alternatives that would be looked at for compliance could include a filtration, precipitation, adsorption, or oxidation. Those are generally the types of treatment that would remove copper from wastewater. Those types of treatment are pretty high-level treatment processes and more customarily used in drinking water treatment than in wastewater treatment. And then, of course, whatever's removed during those processes carries its own environmental problems that would need to be addressed. Second option is ask the DNR to prepare an amendment to allow the city time to complete dissolved metals translator study. Now, the translator study is a really detailed protocol of sampling and testing the receiving stream to determine the amount of the copper discharge that's dissolved in the stream water. Okay, the dissolved portion of the copper is the toxic portion to the aquatic life. And that's the whole reason for a copper limit, is because of toxicity to aquatic life. And that dissolved portion is a portion of the total copper that's discharged from the plant. But this study is another study to try to determine that with the desired results, of course, being increased copper effluent requirement. So a higher effluent requirement that the plant could possibly make currently. Now, that'd be the ultimate goal of a study like this. It's unknown whether that'll happen or not, but until the study's performed, it would be unknown. A metal translator study actually takes, it's 10 samples that are spaced monthly, generally. It'll take a year or more to get those 10 samples. For example, the BLM that was just completed was initiated in March of 2019, required 24 duplicated samples. So generally, we would have thought 24 months, but it took us 3.5 years to get the acceptable sampling protocol for it. So that's how detailed these sampling protocols are. If there's variation in the samples, they're often thrown out. There can be sampling error, lab error. We've encountered all of it in this BLM study. So you're looking at probably a minimum of another year if you proceed with a metals translator study. So at this point, would just, unless there are any questions, would just desire your, or like your desired direction on proceeding with the copper compliance at wastewater treatment plant.
Randy, I do have a question on this. So this is the wastewater out of the city of Carroll. How much are they taking in from the outside, such as acreages? So if I get my septic tank at home, I get it cleaned out, and it's getting brought somewhere. How much of that is the city taking, and how much is that is affecting this?
Oh, okay. At the wastewater treatment plant, we do accept waste from pumped septic tanks, but we don't receive very much. You know, it's a few loads, maybe even just a few loads a month. And those loads are in the 300-gallon range. So it's really pretty small. You know, those could be tested separately or sampled separately, just out of curiosity to see what it is. But their percentage contribution to the total flow is pretty low. There just isn't a lot.
Okay. I would just hate for us to spend a bunch of money if there's, if that's a factor into it. So,
Sure. Yeah, it would be a small, if anything, a small factor.
okay.
I know that option one here is in the gajillions of dollars to do. So I, for one, am only more interested in option number two. What kind of costs would we incur with a study? I know you talked about a year and 10 samples, but
Yeah.
can you give us any kind, and who does this and, you know?
Our personnel would take the
Oh,
samples.
our personnel?
Yeah. The cost
Those are-
would just be the laboratory analysis cost.
Oh,
On it,
okay.
and that's what we've done with the BLM. We've taken all the samples, our personnel, and just sent them to the lab we work with, and I'm not exactly sure what the cost of this type of analysis is or testing. Those can run, at least it's limited to 10 samples.
Yeah, and we know it's not going to be in the gajillions of dollars, so.
Right.
Randy, is there any chance they would not approve the amendment? Or is this an automatic thing that if we ask them for an amendment to the permit, they would do it?
They have indicated that they would,
Okay.
yes.
Well, I think it's
Well,
an
when Mike
easy.
Pogue Weaver and myself went to Washington DC, we met with the DNR complaining about this and talking about this. And they set us up with an individual in Kansas City. I don't know if you got that information from Mike, or we can get it from Mike. That would be able to work with us during this time.
Yeah, I did not receive that information.
Yeah, so Mike has it.
Anything about it. Did you have the individual's name?
Mike does.
Okay,
I can get it from Mike.
or, yeah, either
Because
way.
the head guy of the DNR wants to work with us on this.
Mm-hmm,
And he's got an office, somebody's got an office in Kansas City that's below him that he assigned to help us.
oh, I see, okay.
Is anybody else in Iowa doing this yet?
There have been a couple of these done, none with copper. There are other metals that have been, this translator study has been performed on. And, but it's relatively done infrequently. And actually, the DNR contacted us asking if we thought this should be done. So basically, what we gathered was they're saying maybe you should do this as part of working with them.
Have you looked at any of this? Like, there's three of them on here. They're Electromet, Samco Technologies, Ventil Aqua, all remove copper from wastewater. Have you looked into any of them or called?
Yeah, we have looked into some of that stuff in the past. Most of what we have found is that some of that technology is employed in industry that is running, you know, a fraction of the waste stream that we run as a city. And those technologies are pretty high tech for a city wastewater treatment plant, high cost operation for the volumes of a municipal plant. I thought you were asking about the metal translator study. There have been a few metal translator studies performed in the state of Iowa. Not many. It's relatively new. And I think the DNR is interested in generating more data for it, from it. And pretty much invited the city to do this. And it obviously kicks the can down the road another year. And hopefully the outcome is good for the city, that you can get away from spending a gazillion dollars or
Gajillion.
gajillion.
That's a
sorry.
word. You look it up.
Yeah, a little more than that. But yeah, it's, it's not unusual. When they talk about filtration in a project like this as being one of the alternatives, you've already seen it. It's reverse osmosis. And you saw it in that water preliminary engineering report is $9 million at the water treatment plant. That's not the wastewater. So you're looking at that plus. So you're in that gajillion range already. So,
How many zeros are gajillion?
Lots.
A lot, yeah,
And them knots are powerful.
yeah. You said that better than I said affluent, so. I'm not much for kicking the can down the road, but coming into tonight's meeting, that was certainly going to be my comment, that I think that would be appropriate here. But I certainly want to hear what the council's wishes are. But I think kicking the can down the road is certainly going to be, beneficial for all.
Well, ironically, in next week, there's a meeting for the League of Cities on this in Lakeview that I plan on going to.
that's for the lead and copper rule.
Yeah.
That's not this one.
Oh. I thought it was
That's
copper.
Only difference.
that's drinking water lead
Oh,
service line
Same
removal.
thing, but a little different?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Ironically, we'll put you in charge of that for volunteering.
I didn't hear you, Tom.
I said ironically, we'll put you in charge of that for volunteering. That's awesome.
Ironically.
Going for nothing.
Any other questions for Randy?
No.
Or is that the direction the council would like
We're
to?
down the road.
Okay, no action taken, or do you want?
Randy, do you need any action
What?
taken on this? No?
You
Well,
want
if that's the
a motion,
indication,
Randy?
we'll initiate the study. I mean, that's just what we would do.
Everybody good with that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, all of you. Okay, that completes a lot of the business except the big one. And so Laura, do I think I turned this over to Jeff?
How about
See, I
that?
had Laura and Jeff here and
I'll let
We're
Jeff
going to
start.
very quickly turn it over to the people that know what they're talking about.
okay. And that
So-
would be the work session fiscal year 24 introduction. Shoot, Jeff.
Okay, very good. So you all should have received your budget books tonight. I think some of you picked them up earlier today, actually. We're just going to go through very briefly tab A, and then Laura's going to spend just a little bit more time on tab B, and then we'll be done. We're hoping for about 15 minutes. Laura, does that sound right? Or less.
Talk.
I know this is pretty important.
Yeah, there's college football championships tonight. I'm sure you guys are all excited about, so, except the Hawkeyes aren't in it, so we don't care. But So anyway, first of all, I wanted to recognize the department heads. This year was extremely challenging on many fronts, and we've hit on that, and I'm not going to read through all of that, but you guys can read that later. But with the costs, right, on everything that we've done this last year, costs have risen, supply chain issues have caused us issues, inflation continues to cause all of us in our personal lives as well as our professional lives headaches. There's just a lot of things that impacted us in a negative way from a budget standpoint. So the department heads and Laura and I met in November? I can't even remember now. A bunch. We've met a bunch of times as a group and then a number of times individually. And then each of the department heads came back as we had to sharpen our pencils and find basically multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars. But what we presented to you tonight is what we would like to call a balanced budget. We did respect the 25% limit that the council has been trying to work with as far as having a general fund reserve that is 25% of the revenues, expected revenues for the coming year. And so we ended up, I think, at 25.02. We did utilize a little bit more local option sales tax money and hotel motel tax money than we might have normally. But we did cut out some things within the budget. We moved some things forward to next year. And so what we're presenting to you tonight, it's about $1.4 million less in expenditures than last year. Laura tells me primarily that's due to fewer capital expenses, primarily from the rec center. We did factor in roughly a 4-cent increase to the levy, which I think we calculated to 0.04%. Does that sound right? 0.34%. And so that is in there for discussion and so forth. I do have a bunch of items within tab A showing you comparisons from the current budget year to the coming budget year, including the actual dollar amounts, the deficit that we're showing of revenues versus expenditures, and the levy rate that we just talked about. One of the things that impacted us in kind of an unknown way is the rollback on commercial, industrial, and railroad properties. Most of you are familiar with that, and I explain it in some detail here, but the amount of revenue that we're going to lose is somewhat of an unknown, but at least for the time being, the state is telling us they're going to backfill that amount, but from a budget perspective, we don't know what either of those numbers are exactly, so that's a guesstimate at this point. And we use, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
So is the levy rate reflecting that we're getting the backfill?
Yes.
Okay.
Did the state indicate how long they would backfill?
No.
They did and they didn't. The idea currently is that it would just go on forever, which we all know it won't.
Yeah, it won't.
But the state treasurer, auditor, somebody has already said because of the expected growth to values of those types of properties, that money that they're allocating so far will be insufficient beginning in fiscal year 29. So anyway, those things are in there. We took into account the council priorities from our meeting on November 2nd. The two biggies there were the Merchants Park project, which we're still waiting information on a grant and such. And then the other one that was identified in that session was the compensation and classification plan, which we've incorporated some monies into the budget to try to address some of that. The rest were kind of in limbo until we know a little bit more about the union negotiations, where well over half of our full-time employees are covered. Those negotiations are scheduled to begin anyway next Thursday. So we're hoping that those will go smoothly and maybe we'll get them done in 1 or 2 days with any luck. I listed some other notable items there that you guys are all familiar with, but there were no increases to the water or stormwater utility rates. By ordinance, the council has adopted a 1.3% increase to sewer utility rates beginning on July 1, and that is factored into this budget. Construction of the street maintenance facility is projected to be completed sometime next month or March. Does that sound correct, Randy? The airport LED lighting project is scheduled for completion during this calendar year. As you'll recall, we're a 90% federal grant with a 10% match. We've allocated $20,000 from the hotel motel tax to begin addressing repair and preservation of the cemetery walls. And really, I guess that's, you guys can read through the nuts and bolts of that section later, but again, I'm a complete novice when it comes to putting together something of this size. You know, we always joke about Jethro Clampett and his mathematics here, but when you start talking millions, $25 million budgets, that's a lot of zeros. And without the assistance of the department heads and the work that they've done to project the needs and wants of their departments and the things that are going to help them get their jobs done efficiently, this wouldn't have happened. And it all funnels through this young lady here, who was here all day yesterday, most of the day Saturday. We've been here several weekend days, nights. She takes her computer home every night, so this is the person who made this all happen. I'd love to take credit, but Laura said I couldn't, so. But no, she's done an exceptional job, and we owe her great debt of gratitude. Now, all that being said, this is a proposal to you And as we go through tonight, well, not so much tonight, but next Monday and Wednesday, and if we need to pass that, we'll be looking to you for guidance or whatever, if we need to make some adjustments, and we'll make all of that happen accordingly, so. Laura?
Yeah, you talked about the local option sales tax and motel tax. What did you say about that? I didn't quite.
We want to hit on that a little bit. We took a few things out of those that in the past we probably haven't so much, or we've taken a little bit more.
What do you mean, out of?
We've, instead of using general fund to do cemetery wall, is that one of them? I
One
think
of them,
we took that out of local option sales tax, I think, wasn't it? Okay. So some expenses that might normally have been a general fund expense, we've taken out of those other pots of money.
Yeah, we're seeing that a little
You
bit.
used it to do projects, though.
Yes,
Yes.
we're still gearing or trying to make proposals that we're using hotel, motel, and local option sales tax for projects as opposed to day-to-day operations.
You can't do that.
However, if you guys have followed, the state, we're back to work today, right? It's always sometimes a little bit scary for cities, and I know one of their top priorities, among other ones, is property tax reform, is what they're calling it. Now, what that will look like, we don't know. However, it will be a topic that's going to be discussed again. Just like they made some changes to last year in their last year's session, made changes to what we're implementing here tonight, or during this budget session.
And in all likelihood, those reforms will not be favorable to us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much.
So do you want to hit on some of the fund balances at the end of tab A?
Yep, before we do that, if we could, I did set out on top of your budget books, there was a memo with some information, and what included in there was the budget work session schedule. As you recall, I think we started this a couple of years ago, where we try to break it down so you know what topics we're gonna plan on talking about each night, so that way you can kind of maybe what you're going to look at before the next budget work session, you know, these are the areas we're going to talk about. Monday is our next session. I tried to, in essence, try to overload it, maybe not overload it, but I did make it a little bit heavier. But if we get to a point next Monday night and realize, okay, we need to stop at some point, we might have to move some stuff back to the next budget session. But this is kind of the outline that we're gonna work from going forward. But if you have any questions or concerns, please get a hold of me this week in the office, okay? Then the intent of tonight was to go through tab A and tab B, some comments to get you to start thinking about the budget and what the proposal is before you. And then if it stirs some thoughts, some questions, get a hold of us. If we need to do a little bit of research before next Monday, before next session, we need to know about that. So, without further ado, our first information under tab A, page 1, after Jeff's cover memo, we do have the projected fund balances, and as he mentioned, we do have a proposal here that shows, or we're planning to, our guesstimate is to end the year of the general fund 25%, ending balance to be 25% of the projected revenues. That's always when we talk about being a balanced budget, in my mind, that's what we're trying to propose and show to you. There's a lot of stuff in all these other funds. We'll talk about those as time goes on. But it does show that we are spending more than the revenue overall. But it is that a lot of these things, we're planning on some capital projects to be completed sometime in the next fiscal year, if not in fiscal '23, including like the street maintenance facility, the rec center building project, some things in the Parks and Rec area that we've touched about, the Merchants Park project, if that goes forward. The airport project with their LED lighting conversion. If there's anything that jumps out at you on tab A with some of this stuff, let me know. Otherwise, I'm gonna keep moving forward and talk about the information under tab B. I've prepared a few notes for things for you to look at.
I think we should have a list of those projects that are being paid this year and know the dollar amount on that, so we can be prepared for the following year if we're gonna be above our expenses or our income. You don't follow that?
No, I'm not necessarily following what you need.
Which projects?
Well, what projects are you saying that are gonna be completed in the capital projects? The dollar figures on those. So right now, our expenses is 32 million.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Of that 32 million, how many of those dollar projects are gonna be done this year, that we won't have those expenses next year.
Okay?
Because what I'm worried about is the expenses being higher than our income next year. We can absorb it for 1 year, because you decrease the amount of our savings.
I see what you're getting at. With the rec center project, we do have all the funding identified. Well, there's one piece that still needs to occur, which is a $700,000 debt obligation or issuance. Otherwise, the rest of the funding has been already applied to this project. So we're just spending down the monies we have on hand.
Right, that's what I'm saying, that's what I'm worried about, is, you know, are we gonna still have some of those budgets items again next year that we won't have the revenue income for?
Well, if we don't have the revenue, then we'll have to take a look at where we would get it
Okay.
or how we're gonna spend it. Or if we do the project, how you're gonna find the revenue for it. But everything obviously in here is accounted for with the revenue. The one little bit that we're a little bit unsure on is the Merchants Park project.
Right.
Because there is a grant that we're waiting to hear about. So if that grant does not get awarded, then we have some decisions to make. Well, we'll still have decisions to make regardless if the grant gets awarded or not, but that is being factored in here that a grant would be awarded.
That was on local option sales tax, though, wasn't it?
There's a number of funding sources. It's actually local option sales tax, hotel motel, and some ARPA funds, and then the grant.
And then we were looking for some private contributions too.
Oh, yes,
right?
thank you, yes. Some other private, grants and some donations.
Yeah, that's there.
Yes, thank you, I forgot about those. Okay, so the next tab under tab B, let's actually go to page 5 just for a second and look at the assessed values of our property in the city of Carroll. You'll note the assessed values did increase slightly at 1.37% overall, which is good. However, once you apply the rollback, that did affect a number of things. So if you go back up one page to the taxable valuations, we'll talk about the rollbacks and what has been factored in. So the residential rollback did increase, so from about 2.36% from the 54% to 56.5%-ish, give or take a little bit there. And the other thing, even though that went up a couple percentages, the multi-residential classification changed in the fact that, if you recall, a number of years ago, that was a new classification that was in place, had historically been taxed at the commercial rate, which would be either 100% or 90%, and that got rolled back. And then slowly over the last, handful of years, that was getting rolled back a little bit more each time to eventually get to the residential rollback rate. And that it had been going down 3.75% each year, but then in this final year, when the law said this is the last year, now it's gonna be called residential property, no more multi-residential, it was gonna take that final last jump, and that last jump was a 7.25% in rollback instead of 3.75. So we have to factor that in. Then new this year, the commercial, industrial, and railroad properties are being taxed slightly different than what they have been taxed in the past. The first $150,000 of assessed value on those types of properties are being taxed at the residential rate. Any value over that is then taxed at their normal rate of 90%. Which, as we did a little bit of looking at some properties in town, actually for another reason, we do know that there are some properties that are under the $150,000. So that whole property is taxed at the residential rate now instead of the 90% rate. We just don't have a good number or account on how that's going to be impacted. So the state has said that they will backfill this. Instead, the reason this was set up is, instead of all the property, or all the owners of businesses could go and request to get what's called a
Business tax credit.
Tax credit.
thank you, business tax credit. And instead of doing that, they started doing this different taxation. Now, how that's gonna equate one way to the other, we don't for sure know how that is gonna be dollar for dollar, or how close we're gonna be. The advice we had received from the state was either you could do factor in your budget at $0, not knowing how it's gonna impact you, and just build your budget off of that. Or take a look what you have been receiving as your business property tax credit amount from, because we're receiving that from the state, or through our monthly allocations of property taxes from the county treasurer. So we do have it, I do have information for the past couple of years to know how much monies through our monthly allocation we're getting relates to this business tax credit. So what we built into this budget is based upon that number. So we think we're in the ballpark as opposed to putting in 0, because that's not gonna be close, we're gonna get something. So I based it off of what we had historically been getting. And we've also received half a year this year already, and we're in the ballpark. If it continues at the same rate of this backfill of what we're getting right now, we're gonna be close, hopefully. But until it actually funnels out and all the calculations are done at the state level, we just won't know for sure. But I feel pretty comfortable that what we put in here is gonna be pretty close. Does anybody, those are the main highlights on the evaluation stuff. Unless somebody has any questions that kind of popped into their head right now. The next page is the residential property tax rollback and history to show you what the rollback and what of the residential property has been in the city. So the red is the assessed value versus the blue, which is the taxable value. I looked today, or did a calculation, so our residential classification, 75.8% of our total assessed value is residential. So any type of a rollback there is gonna have some significance on the taxable amount of our overall taxable amount. But as you can kind of see, it slowly, there is a trend that the assessed value of our residential property has been going up over time. That's a good thing from that perspective. The next page is a total taxable valuation chart. So this includes all of our property classifications and what it has done over time. It has slowly gone up. However, you have seen the last couple